The execution is one of the most iconic cinematic themes of the gangster genre. They leave a lasting impact on the legacy of the film and deliver cinematic moments that can change the entire landscape of its plot. However, when we begin to analyze some of these scenes, a common sequence of distinct events becomes prevalent, all leading up to the final kill. Specifically, we will be looking at 3 films we've watched over the past semester to show you 4 specific themes we've observed in major execution scenes that occur in them. These 3 films are Scarface, Mystic River, and The Godfather Part 2. When we analyze these 3 executions, we notice a thematic, almost ritualized sequence of events: a forced confession, emasculation of the victim, the occurrence of doublespeak, and a visual transition in the plot. Forced confession. This is the moment where the victim, intimidated by our gangster protagonist, confesses to betraying the loyalty to that gangster protagonist. We observe this theme more in the narrative than in the scene's construction. In most cases, the victim has a gun pointed at them with the threat of death imminent. In Scarface, Tony comes barging into Frank's office, furious and believing that Frank has ordered a hit on him. He pulls out a gun and points it at Frank's head, threatening to kill him.
It is soon after this that Frank, having been abandoned by his associates, admits to the hit and pleads with Tony to spare his life.
Please, Tony.
In Mystic River, a drunk Dave is surrounded by Jimmy and his associates, where Jimmy demands that Dave confess to murdering his daughter Katie. Although Dave has not done this, his livelihood is threatened, and, hoping to save his life, falsely admits that he killed Katie. Lastly, we have The Godfather Part 2. A distinguishing trait from this scene is that Fredo is not threatened by a weapon. Instead, there is prior knowledge that Fredo is conspiring with Roth. Thus, Fredo, likely intimidated by Michael's presence, confesses to doing so.
In all of these scenes, our victim is forced into admitting their betrayal to our gangster protagonists. It is this threat of death and confession of betrayal that is able to create tension in the beginning of these climactic moments.
Following confession, the structure or events of the scene cause the victim to seem both literally and figuratively below our gangster protagonist, thus stripping away the victim's dignity. We identify this as an emasculation of the victim. Ultimately, this is the moment where a victim's fate is sealed. In Scarface, we see a man formerly of great stature, Frank, weeping at the feet of Tony for his life. Initially, Tony was the one begging Frank for a job, and now the begging has come full circle, representing something even greater, life and death. Tony decides he will not kill Frank, but lets his right-hand man, Manny, do the job for him, returning the disrespect that Frank paid to him.
Godfather 2, Fredo's emasculation occurs in the Corleone family lake house. Fredo confesses that he was conspiring with Roth during Michael's business dealings. While Michael is standing up, Fredo is laying in a chair in a very vulnerable position as Michael expresses that he wishes to have no further contact with him. Here, Fredo's emasculation is constructed visually. Notice how Fredo struggles to sit up in his chair, how flaccid and helpless he looks in Michael's presence.
Finally, in Mystic River, after Dave is forced to falsely confess, Jimmy makes a decision to take his life. He takes out a knife and repeatedly stabs Dave in the abdomen, weakening him and literally forcing Dave to his knees. Due to these events, Jimmy has constructed Dave as someone who is now below him, stripping him of any power he may have left, and crippling him before finishing him off.
Doublespeak, the act of a character saying one thing when in reality they mean the opposite. This is a common trope of the gangster genre. Typically, our gangster protagonist says something to a character that, out of context, may seem like a reassurance of their protection. However, in reality, a death sentence has just been issued. In Scarface, after Frank has pleaded Tony to spare him, Tony shakes him off his feet, then saying,
I won't kill you.
While Frank perceives this to mean that he will get to live another day, Tony actually turns to his right-hand man and orders him to kill Frank instead. At first, it seems that Tony has shown some mercy, but in reality, Frank's fate was already sealed. Tony will not return Frank's betrayal. Frank's death was basically decided after Tony emasculated him, and the viewers can now see how powerless and cowardly he is in this scene. Finally, we see a slightly different form of doublespeak occur in Godfather Part 2. While in the other instances, our gangster protagonist seems to offer words of relief before going back on them, Michael's words towards Fredo are far more cynical. Essentially, Michael disowns his brother. However, he makes no mentions that he intends to kill Fredo, and later appears to have reconciled with him. Thus, Fredo perceives that his life has been spared. We see that this is not the case. In Mystic River, the doublespeak occurs when Jimmy promises to spare Dave's life, provided that he confess to Katie's murder. Seeing no other option, Dave falsely confesses, and Jimmy, satisfied at finally finding his daughter's killer, is free to kill Dave.
Before a narrative transition is free to take place, it must be preceded by a visual one.
The visual transition that takes place in Scarface is more subtle than the others. After Tony has killed Frank and Bernstein, Tony quite literally walks off into the sunset. The oceanfront beach wallpaper, which symbolizes Tony's desire for wealth and power, illustrates that Tony has attained this goal. Mystic River also employs this technique. Dave is shot by Jimmy, a bright light flashes and fades to white, which represents the almost magical catharsis of the community. An embarrassing moment for the communal conscience has been quite literally washed away, and the neighborhood is free to move on. Finally, in The Godfather Part 2, we can see the use of light and sun to mark this transition. After Fredo has been shot, we make a cut back to the boat, where he is sitting and is gone. Following the disappearance of his body, we are left with a view of the sun setting on the lake. The use of light and/or sun involvement in the scene seems to have a common theme used in mafia film that represents the transition after death.
One last aspect we must analyze is how the nature of the transition is different. In Mystic River, the transition is a communal one. As Dave dies, the pain inflicted not only on him but also the community are washed from the collective conscious.
In Scarface, the transition is one of power. In this transition, Tony has risen to the top of the ladder. In Godfather Part 2, this transition takes on a hybrid form, in that Michael's transition represents his culmination of his power, but also how the nature and values of his organization evolve from those of his father's.
When combined, these four themes deliver some of the most well-structured and intense moments in cinematic history. Climactic moments of great decision are being made that have profound effects on the plot. Executions are among the most important scenes in the gangster film genre, and while there may be common sequences, the genius lies in its invisibility and how these sequences appear unique despite using similar elements.